and start the broadcast. Good morning. Welcome to the DBA Fundamentals first presentation of September. Today we have Kendra Little, and you should be able to see her smiling face in her webcam right now. Presenting, I'll get it out in a second, SSMS Shortcuts and Secrets, and it's not Warner Chavez. I knew I would do something wrong. I didn't. So, okay, I said before I got started that I threw this together this morning, so I had everything right except Warner is not presenting today. Century One is our sponsor, and they just re-upped with us, so we'll be giving away more prize money as we go through our sessions. We hadn't set up anything yet, but they're a great company. They got great free things. We always like free things. They also sell some things, but they also have a lot of great free things. Here's some of them. This session is already over. I should have modified that also, but you can get all sorts of trial downloads, and you can get Plan Explorer for free. That's a fantastic product. You can get free tuning advice, and here's the links. Virtual group news. After the session is over, we'll take a list of the people that have attended, and we'll pick out 5 people. We'll send that to PASS headquarters, and they have to first verify that you're a member of PASS. So if you're not a member of PASS and you want to be involved in this, go ahead and join up. You can select any number of sessions you want to or groups you want to follow, or none at all, but go ahead and sign up. Then they'll check and see if you're already registered. You're not allowed to win one if you're already registered, so they really haven't got that working. Other than that, you're wide open. So we'll pick those 5 names, and we'll notify the winner by email. We're only going to give away 2 sessions this year. I found out before the session started that we only had 54 uses, but we will be giving away $500 to one person out of those 54 users, and I'll probably be doing that in the next week. I'll be figuring out exactly who it is, and I'll be alerting you as to the $500 so you can help pay for your airfare or hotel. PASS Summit, that's what we're talking about, and I can tell you everybody that's ever been will tell you it's fantastic. It's one of the best technical conferences, if not the best technical conference you'll ever go to. And it's not just the sessions, it's the people and all the people that you'll network with. So go to passsummit.com and sign up. Use this code. You can still save $150. You won't be included in our $500 drawing because we're going to do that in the next week. And that ended at the end of August, but it'll still save you $150. Here's some of our sessions coming up. Next week we'll be doing From DBA to Data Scientist with R. Mike West will be presenting that. Down Under session will be T-SQL's hidden support feature, and I think that's Jennifer McCowan. Then September the 19th, my wife's birthday, we'll be doing shortcuts from an inpatient DBA. That should be Ann, A-N. So I'm still messed up on this thing all around. But Andy is a new presenter out there, and I asked different people, and he had, from people that I talked to, and 2 people mentioned his name as a really good up-and-coming speaker. So I'd really want to show up for that if I were you. Upgrade strategies for highly available SQL Server environments with Edmund Sarmiento. He is fantastic on this stuff, and he's a great teacher also. Anyway, PASS virtual groups. There's lots of other virtual groups if you want to try out different things over practically every topic and practically every major language. So check it out and join some groups, get some free education. And apparently there are upcoming SQL Saturdays. It's just that I didn't have the latest ones handy. So go to SQL Saturday.com and you should be able to find the one closest to you. We will be recording the sessions, and you can go to dbafund.org to pick up our and go to our meeting archive to get them, or you can go to dbafundtube.org. Okay. On to today's presentation. Kendra Little has been around for a while now. She started out with Brent Ozar. Her and Brent started or were partners in his company, and they separated a year or two ago, and Kendra is doing some stuff on her own that is fantastic, and you need to take advantage of SQL workbooks. It's all free right now. That's what's so great about it, besides the fact that you get great training. So really, you need to go try it out, sign up for it. And in fact, I think she's even got a session that's more in detail and a class that goes with this. And it's really strange because, and I was telling her beforehand, you go in and you go through the entire thing and you order and you go and you fill everything out. Eventually, I'm sure she wants to start charging, but for right now, it's all free. Take advantage of it. There's some great classes out there. Kendra is one of the best teachers out there. One of the things that we try to do at DBA Fundamentals is we try to get people that we really like to listen to. Sometimes there's great teachers that you really don't like to listen to. I like to listen to Kendra. I like to listen to Brent. I like to listen to there's 3, 4, 5 other people that I just love to listen to, and Kendra's one of them. So I think you're in for a treat on this. I'm going to turn it over to you now, Kendra.
All right.
Let's see. Let me present it. Pass it back.
Yeah, we'll do the screen sharing shuffle.
Yeah, make sure we get it right.
Thank you so much for the nice intro. That was so kind. I'm like all like humbled now. All right, so let's show my screen. So it should start. It should now show PowerPoint. I promise folks we're not doing a lot of slides today. I have 3 slides, but do you see the cat on the screen?
I see a cat.
Okay, perfect. If you see the cat, I bet other people see the cat. So let's get going with Management Studio shortcuts and secrets. So we will be doing lots of demos today, and we're going to cover as many shortcuts and secrets as we can. We'll get to as many questions and answers as we can. What content we don't get to, you have a downloadable handout. So there's a little handout section of GoToWebinar. There's a cheat sheet that covers all of the shortcuts you're going to see today, plus more that you won't have time to see, as well as tips on setting up Management Studio. So I'll try to make sure that we have time to get to the stupid pet tricks no matter what, because I always have a request for stupid pet tricks. If you are using an older version of Management Studio, though, one really important thing to know is that they have been working hard. The SQL Server team has been working hard on making Management Studio easy for them to enhance. In the old days, they had to release Management Studio with versions of SQL Server, but they split them off. They did a big effort to get it into its own release cadence, and now they release updates to Management Studio regularly, even if they don't have an update to the full SQL Server product. You can also install new versions of Management Studio side by side with the old versions. So right now we're in the 17s of Management Studio. The current version as of today is version 17.2. You don't have to replace your old familiar version of Management Studio if you're not ready to trust the new one. You can install both of them just on your client machine, not touching your SQL Server itself, and try out the new one and just switch over to it when you're comfortable. So on the Microsoft site, make sure you've got the latest, greatest version of Management Studio, whether or not you want to commit to it. And I'll try to call out today the features that are specific to newer versions of Management Studio. So I am now showing, hopefully you see on your screen, SQL Server Management Studio. And there's a comment here that says, I wish they would work on making it crash less often. Someone else asked this as a question before the webcast. Sometimes I have issues where shortcuts stop working in Management Studio. Why could that happen? And then sometimes it crashes too. If you have a situation where shortcuts are just stopping working, I would check what your version of Management Studio is. Are you working on a really, really old one? Because you may be hitting bugs they've fixed. I would also look at plugins or add-ins you have in Management Studio and see if disabling those changes the stability of it. Because it could be, I like putting add-ins in it too. Sometimes they can have negative interactions. Sometimes it is going to crash. And this is part of why I like running Management Studio on the client machine rather than running it on the SQL Server itself, because if I'm going to have an application crash, I would rather it not be on the production server. My favorite message though, and I haven't seen this one in a while, is sometimes you get this little message at the bottom right of your screen. It'll show up like down here, and it was a pop-up that would be like, SQL Server Management Studio is busy and is not responding. It would be like, basically it's the message that says talk to the hand. Haven't seen that one in a while personally. So what I've done to set up is I have restored the database wide world importers. This is a totally free sample database from Microsoft. You can download it at Microsoft's GitHub site, and we will just be using that little database for a sample. Now we're gonna do our first shortcut right now, and I am purposefully using a loud keyboard today because I want you to be able to hear when I hit the keys. I'm going to hit Control Tab. Control Tab brings up this little IDE where if I keep hitting Control Tab, I can scroll through the files/sessions that I have open in my Management Studio. So here's my setup. I want to go to demo number 1. I'm holding down Control and just hitting Tab to move through these. And when I let go, I automatically switch to that session. That's one of my favorite little things in Management Studio, and I kind of forgot to do it for years. So I really, really love that. We're going to start out in the master database and just go over some of the shortcuts that I use the most often. Starting a new session, using a database, executing a query, and then controlling results. So Control N, Control U, Control E, and Control R are really the ones I use the most often. We're going to do a couple little bonuses in here too with toggling around. So let's say I want to run this query, and maybe I've got something executing in this session. I want to do it in a different session. I'm going to use Control C to copy it. Now Control N opens up a new session. I paste this in, but SQL Server quickly highlights everything in red. I'm not in the right database context. IntelliSense is saying with those red underlines, I don't know what these objects are. So I need to change the database, but I'm too busy waving my hands at the webcam. I don't want to reach for the mouse. Control U takes me up to this dialog box for use database, and I can start typing in there. It immediately changes the focus up there, which is really nice. So Control U takes me up there. I'm going to type a capital W and then hit Enter. As soon as I hit Enter, it returns me to my previous focus, which is that window. So that's really nice. I can use Control U I can change back to master. I can change around without ever taking my hand off the keyboards unless I want to, wave my hands. Now that I'm back in my query, I like to use Control E because I'm doing things like Control U. I've got my pinky right there on the control. So to execute, I like to do Control E. Lots of people are fans of F5. There's even a really old one that I think was Alt X or something like that I know there are some fans of. So whichever way is your favorite, you can do it. I'm just a Control E person at heart. So here are my results. What if I want to copy them? Well, I could use my mouse and go down to the results pane, but the F6 button is really useful. I hit F6 and now notice that order ID is highlighted in blue. Moving my hands up and hitting F6, I can toggle between the T-SQL and all of these results panes as well as the messages bar. Now that I'm down in the results pane, I can do Control A and copy the results if I want. I can arrow around. If I hit F6 again, Now I'm on the Messages tab, and same thing, I can actually select, I can copy, I can even type in Messages if I want to. And now when I hit F6 again, I'm back up to the T-SQL. It took me a long time to get used to hitting F6, but it's actually really, really convenient. Another one, and I use this all the time, is Control R for control result. Hitting Control R toggles that bottom results pane as to whether it shows, and especially if you're editing a large T-SQL script, a lot of times you just don't want that results pane taking up room. So you might run part of the query, review the results, but then you want to get back to editing. Control R will get rid of it. Well, now I am done with this query window. Oh, and we have a comment that Control Tab, Dane really enjoys Control Tab. Yeah, I agree. Control Tab, especially for those of us who like using Alt Tab with Windows to switch between programs, with Control Tab, you're like, I feel so at home now. So I could use, to get out of this window, I could use here Control Tab, right, to go to a different window, but what if I'm done with Query 2 and I just want to close it? There's a couple different ways. A way that, admittedly, I use this a lot, and I think it was Argenis Fernandez on Twitter who recommended this. He said, you know, I can't always remember all the shortcuts I want, but it doesn't matter, because most of the stuff I want to do, I can do with the keyboard if I just hit the Alt button. I just pressed Alt, and now I am up at the File menu at the top. I have File highlighted now, and I can arrow through my menus and look for different options. So to close this window, I can do Alt, and now I can either arrow down or hit F, since F in File is underlined. And if I want to close this window, I could type C. Since C is underlined, it will close this window. Or I could arrow down and now hit return, and it says, do you want to save anything? I'm going to hit escape and cancel this, because there's another way to close the window. And this is one that I always like to make fun of myself for, because sometimes I forget this one just slightly. The way to close the window is to use Control F4. The mistake I sometimes make is to hit Alt F4. The Alt button is right next to the Control button. Alt F4 is a general Windows shortcut that says, hey, I want to exit the application. So yes, you can close the window with Alt F4, but you're going to close everything. And I think of Control F4 as controlled close, whereas Alt F4 is the big close. It won't shut down the whole instance, but it will shut the Management Studio application down. So let's do it one more time. Control F4. I don't want to save my changes, and it just closes that session. So Control Tab and Control F4 for moving between sessions and closing sessions can take a lot of that. You don't have to reach up and click on those tabs at the top anymore. There is a little bit of wackiness when it comes to the little use dialog at the top, though. The use dialog at the top is a little wacky if you use a case-sensitive instance. When you set up the SQL Server itself, whoever sets up the SQL Server gets to choose the instance collation. And collation is kind of a fancy way of saying, do we care about capitalization, and what character sets should we use? Lots of us, myself included, like having our instances be case sensitive. What you use is going to depend on your application, but I always test on case sensitive instances to make sure that my scripts won't fail if someone runs them on a case sensitive instance. So on a case sensitive instance, if I do Control U and I try to use MSDB, but I type capital M, capital S, it looks like it's working, and I failed on my zoom there. Let's do that again. So we're going to do Control U. We're going to do capital M, capital S, and now we're going to zoom carefully. It looks like it's working because it auto-completes, right? Like it's like, yeah, the MSDB database is what we want. But if I actually hit return on that, it will say, oh, I don't actually have a database named capital M, capital S DB. So IntelliSense is kind of a little more optimistic when it comes to that use dialog box. If you're getting errors up there, then it might just be that you've got a case-sensitive instance and you need to actually start with the proper case rather than letting it auto-complete for you. So it's lots of fun. Control Tab, it works. One note, and I put this in the script because I do forget this. So Control Tab brings up that little IDE. There is another way to do this. Notice that we've got active tool windows there on the left, right? Like, how do I get over here? What if I want to go to Object Explorer or Properties? Well, Control Tab only cycles around in active files. If I want to use the keyboard to switch to these guys, one way to do it is to hit Alt F7. It brings up the same IDE, but I'm over on the left side on the active tool windows. And if I keep Alt pressed down, I can use the arrow key to go anywhere I want. So Alt F7 is a little more flexible in terms of I can get to active tool windows or any active file. Let's say I want to go to Object Explorer. Now I can arrow around in there, and no, I don't want to install those diagrams. But it is a little more awkward to press Alt F7, so you may prefer Control Tab, or you may like Alt F7. I tend to stick with Control Tab, probably just because I'm used to having my hands over there on the keyboard and I don't even have to look at the keys, whereas I can't really remember where the F7 is personally. So let's do a little more about IntelliSense. Oh, and we've got a question about query shortcuts. Yes, we'll be covering query shortcuts soon. I'm a big fan of query shortcuts. So let's talk a little more about IntelliSense first, though, because it's useful for auto-completing a lot of things, but it can be frustrating at times. But IntelliSense can save you tons of time in Management Studio. If it's acting weird, you can refresh your cache in Management Studio with Control-Shift-R, and we'll take a look at how that can be a little wacky. It is enabled by default, and you can tell if IntelliSense is enabled by looking at this little toolbar icon here. When it's highlighted, IntelliSense is on. You can enable and disable this with a keyboard shortcut, though, and if you use IntelliSense a lot, you may actually want to periodically disable it, because I've had issues where if I'm editing a really big script, I'll have like CPU go way up on my laptop. I disable IntelliSense and suddenly CPU usage drops. Sometimes it can cause high CPU on your client, and you may not even be using it at the time for much. So disabling it and enabling it is really handy. The shortcut to disable it and enable it has actually changed in the most recent release of Management Studio. The most recent release is 17.2, and that's what I'm running right here. If I go to Help and About, I'm running Management Studio 17.2, which was released in August of 2017. And they just did some work on IntelliSense, and we used to be able to enable and disable it with the chord, Control-Q, Control-I. It is now Control-B, Control-I. So I remember this as control baffling IntelliSense. You can pick your favorite B word to remember this, but here's what a chord looks like. A chord is two shortcuts that you press in succession, not at the same time. So I'm going to do Control B. You have to learn to look for this, but when you start a chord, there's a little message at the bottom of the screen that says, and notice that my hands are off the keyboard. I have pressed the first part of the chord, Control B. It's waiting to see what will be the second part to complete the chord. And I don't have to finish it. I could just press Escape if I wanted to, but I do want to finish it. I'm going to do Control I. I have now completed the chord, and IntelliSense is now off. This is no longer highlighted. So it can be really useful to do that if you don't want to use the keyboard. I have now re-enabled IntelliSense by doing that chord again. In the T-SQL window itself, IntelliSense, one of the things I love about it is that it is good at correcting case. it's just not in that use database dialog box, it has an issue with it. But in this window itself, it's great at it. So if I want to autocomplete master, I type MAS, it has suggested master to me. I like that suggestion. I'm going to hit tab, and it autocompletes for me and corrects the capitalization. Love that. I don't have to retype anything. That is totally one of the greatest things about Management Studio. And I'm going to reset my script so that it can be run again. I can also use arrow keys with those suggestions when there's more than one. So I'm going to type A and start. Let's say I want sys.database files, but I don't really feel like typing more of the word. I am now hitting the down arrow, and notice that the outline on the suggestion has changed to solid. When that box is a solid highlight, even if I just hit spacebar, it is going to accept the suggestion. If, let's say, I start arrowing down and I decide I don't want the suggestion, to get rid of the suggestion, I'm going to have to hit escape. I don't have to take it. But once that box is solid, even spacebar will auto-complete it. Doing this and getting that, so right now, see how it just has the outline? IntelliSense actually has two modes, and it just faded out on me, so let's do it again. Let's zoom in on, and this is actually tricky to zoom in on, as you can see. I'm going to catch it one of these times, or maybe we'll just leave it, yeah, we'll just leave it like this. When you have just this outline, that is actually suggestion mode. As soon as you have a solid box, you have entered a different mode in IntelliSense called completion mode. And completion mode, I am not as, you can actually set it so that it's in completion mode all the time. In the menus, under File, under Edit, there is actually a little IntelliSense menu down there. And you have different options, including whether completion mode is on or off. And I prefer to turn completion mode off so that we're in suggestion mode. And this is one of the confusing things about IntelliSense is I'm like, how do I know which is which? So here's how to know which is which. Right now, I am in suggestion mode. And with suggestion mode, let's say I want to type something that IntelliSense doesn't recognize. Maybe it's that IntelliSense isn't up to date yet, or maybe I'm dealing with like a stored procedure where like an object is created and IntelliSense just doesn't recognize the object name. There are times when we need to type names that IntelliSense doesn't recognize. Like, and in this case, we're going to pretend we want to refer to sys.database. If I'm in suggestion mode, I can type sys.database and hit spacebar, and it won't autocomplete on me. I love that. But the default mode, which we can switch to completion mode with Control, Alt, Spacebar. When I'm in this mode, everything, see how it's automatically highlighted? Whenever I hit Spacebar, it's just going to accept whatever is there. And so you'll get into this situation where you're like, oh no, I don't want that. So you're constantly having to either hit Escape before you finish the word, and then you start typing again, and then you have to hit Escape again. Or you're fighting with IntelliSense. And that's why I don't like that mode. I don't like this auto highlight, auto completion mode. I prefer, I'm going to do Control Alt Spacebar again. I prefer to be in suggestion mode. And in the past, when I didn't understand that there were really two modes, I would sometimes like play with the menus and then not understand what was going on. And the issue was I was getting into completion mode and I didn't really enjoy being there. And Daniel says completion mode always drives me nuts. This helps me use it without it ruining my coding. It does feel like you're fighting against it when you're in completion mode. Another thing that often confused me is sometimes I'd have red underlines and I wouldn't really understand why. IntelliSense essentially is a little smarter than I knew originally. So when we look at this code here, we're like, I have all these red underlines, but these tables do exist. No matter how often I refresh the cache, which I'm hitting Control-Shift-R to refresh IntelliSense's cache, it's still red. The reason is that IntelliSense is smart enough to look at your use database statements and then go look, okay, what's the database context you have defined? And then I'm going to go look in that database for the objects. So these tables are actually in wide world importers. I'm going to change this to wide world importers. And in suggestion mode, if I hit tab, it will autocomplete that suggestion. And see how it automatically caught up. I'm going to do Control Z and undo that. And now I'll do Control Shift R to, I don't know if I beat it or not, because right now it's really fast, but I can force it to refresh that cache. But what's happening behind the scenes is there's a little thread that's going out and looking in all of my system views to say, does this table exist and does it have these columns? This is why IntelliSense does add extra work to your SQL Server for everyone connected to it and it's enabled by default, right? It's on by default. IntelliSense has an extra little thread going out and doing this work for them. You can really become aware of this when you use SQL Server's dedicated admin connection. And this can really confuse you when you're first using this secret session for administrators. SQL Server keeps a little backdoor, and it's had this since 2005, where there's one session that only one person can connect to at once, and it has reserved CPU and memory. So if the SQL Server is under intense pressure, an administrator, only sysadmins can use it, can connect to that session and see what's going on. That session only allows a single thread. So I'm going to connect to it. I'm going to do Alt to get up to my file menu, and then I'm going to go to the query menu. So I'm going to hit Q to go to that query menu. I'm going to go to the change connection there. So this is an example of, okay, I want to change the connection. I honestly have no idea if there's a shortcut key to do this because I always just use Alt to go up to the menu and say change connection. And to connect to the DAC, you type admin and then colon and then your instance name. So I'm saying I want to connect to the dedicated admin connection, and my instance is named Faster01. When I connect to it, I get a message that says you failed to connect to this session. But when I look at the bottom right of my screen, my status bar in SSMS says you are connected to the admin session for this. What has happened is my session connected successfully. The second thread that follows right behind it for IntelliSense failed to connect because I was already connected. And this message up there is for the IntelliSense thread. So IntelliSense confuses lots of DBAs who are like, why can't I connect to the dedicated admin connection? We can prove that, in fact, I am connected to the dedicated admin connection by querying sys.exec sessions and sys.endpoints session 55, which I love that they have this up here in the top bar. I am session 55. One note about that. It can sometimes get out of sync and it can sometimes lie to you. So if you're using it for traces, beware that I've had cases where that was wrong, but right now it is correct. And I am the one connected to the DAC. But IntelliSense is just not going to work. The little highlighted thing says it's enabled up here, right? This thing says IntelliSense is on, but it's not going to work. I can only have one thread. No matter what I do here, it's not going to suggest anything. So sometimes when IntelliSense says it's on, like when you're connected, I mean, it did give me that error. It did tell me, but you know, it is a separate thread. It is going to exert some work against the SQL Server. So I'm going to change my connection again. I'm going to go Alt Q to get to the query menu. I'm going to arrow right, and then, oh, I actually am going to mess it up. So I hit C at the top to get back there, and now H to change connection. And I'm going to go back to my non-DAC connection so I can use IntelliSense again. So that using the keyboard to access the menus, whenever I can't remember a shortcut, I'm like, oh, is it in a menu? Maybe I'll just do it that way if I don't feel like reaching for the mouse. So at times you may want to disable IntelliSense, but I do really like it, especially for its ease of capitalization. One cool thing that we just got in 17.2 of Management Studio, they just fixed it so that IntelliSense is available for Azure SQL Database. Folks have been asking for this for years, and it's really great that we're getting there. We have a question from Faye. I hope I said your name right. Why is it not working when I press Control U to get to that database dropdown? Great question. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use another little feature here. I'm going to use the splitter bar. This is actually an Office feature, which is in Management Studio, and it lets you split your screen and your current script into two editable panes. So I'm going to drag this down because what I want to do is I want to get to a shortcut and show you a shortcut at the top of my script while not losing my place. I've now clicked into the top pane because see how I have right now, it defaults to having two parts visible, but at where I was in the script. So I'm going to click in the top pane and do Control Home to get to the top of the script because I remember I have a note up here. If Control U isn't working for you, check your version of Management Studio. There was a recent bug in a not super old version of Management Studio where Control U didn't work. So upgrading to a newer version might do it. I have also had folks who had third-party plugins in place that made Control U not work. So see if you're using extra tools that integrate in with Management Studio. Those are the two issues I know of that can do that. I can actually type in both areas of the screen when I have the splitter bar, so I can edit in both areas. Now I want to close this up. I'm done with this URL at the top. The pane that I click in is the one that's going to stay active. So if I'm clicked up here and then I close it, I'll be left at the top of the script, which maybe sometimes is what I want. But what I want is I want this part to stay active. So I click down there and then just grab the splitter bar, drag it up, and now I have just a single editable pane again. I can reuse the splitter bar as many times as I want to. So let's do a little more on this. Oh, we got a couple questions about the DAC. Does the dedicated admin connection only work when the instance is local to the server that you're running Management Studio on? There are a couple of different settings related to the DAC. You can configure it so that you can connect remotely to the dedicated admin connection. You've got to change a setting in SP configure, and you may also want to look at your firewall rules because you need to make sure people can get through that port that the dedicated admin connection is on. So if you do a little searching around the DAC, you'll find more details on those 2 points so that you can do it remotely. The remote issue, I believe, specifically applies to clusters. Don't quiz me on this. It's been a while since I've thought about it. All right. So let's do a little more fun. Let's talk more about the settings. Management Studio is almost too configurable. There are so many options you can configure. Sometimes it's really useful to configure what you can see in these tabs up here at the top. So notice that on this tab, on Open Sessions, and let's see if my Zoom will work again. There we go. I've got my Zoom powers back. I've got the file name. And then I've got like my name and my login and my session ID. And I've got even stuff in the middle too, right? I've even got in there the instance name and all sorts of stuff. And sometimes that's super useful, but depending on what you're working on, you may want less to show up there so that maybe you just want to see the file name. Or maybe you just want to see the instance name you're connected with. I'm going to go ahead and go to the Tools menu. And now I'm going to click O to go down to that options. Or actually, let's just arrow down so I can keep it highlighted. A ton of things are configurable in our options. And there's so many things in here. There is a little search bar here. And it says, it tries to give me a hint. Hey, you can get up to these search options with Control E. These search options aren't perfect. There are certain things that you may look for that won't come up with in here, but it is often helpful. And if you can't remember where something is, trying out Control E, and we're going to type, I'm just going to type tabs, right? Here's all of the different types of thing with the word tab I can configure. In this case, I want the editor tab and status bar. So at least it kind of simplifies down where I'm hunting. That can be useful sometimes. In here, there's tab text, and this allows me to configure what I want to see on those tabs. And let's say in my case, I really just do want to see what instance I'm configured to. I'm going to flip everything to false except for include server name. And I'm going to click OK. And this is one of the confusing things. It didn't tell me anything, but notice that nothing has changed on my tabs. Sometimes you change options and it often only applies to new query windows. This is one of those times. If I open a new query window, I just did Control N, now I only have the instance name there. So like if what I'm really worried about is I have like a dev server and a production server and I really want to be able to see which one I'm connected to, maybe I want to configure my tabs that way. I can still do things like right click on it and do copy full path or open containing folder. If I want those options, I don't lose that, but I do have the control over what I can see. So sometimes I'll change that around depending on what I'm working on and what I want to see most. So let's do Control F4 to close that window. I hadn't typed anything in there, so it didn't prompt me about saving it. And now I'm going to go back up to Tools and Options, and I'm going to reset those back because I actually do like having, when I'm doing demos, more of those options showing. I can also use pinned tabs. Let's say that there's one script I have open that I would like, I can navigate around stuff, but there's one script that's really important to me and I may be switching around, but I want it to be kind of in a little place of its own. We can control that. Let me get back to my script here with environment tabs and windows. So I'm going to go into Tools Options, and this time we're going to go into environment, right? That was in text editor that we were in there. This time we're going to go into environment tabs and windows, and we're going to look at the pin status. This is something we got kind of recently, and I like to have these options checked. They don't do everything you might want them to do, but they are still cool. These aren't checked by default. I like to have pin tabs in a separate row, and by default that isn't checked. This one down here is the one that is a little confusing. Maintain pin status. That kind of sounds like even if you close Management Studio, it will remember what's pinned. That is not what that means. It's talking about if you drag it out of a well while Management Studio is open. No matter what settings you put on here, when you close Management Studio and reopen it, it isn't going to reopen the file if it's pinned, or remember it, you have to open the file again and repin it if you're closing the application. Sorry, just don't be confused there. But once I like to have pin tabs in a separate row, because if I want open sessions to sit in its own little area, there it is now in its separate row. And maybe that's a report I have or something important that I'm working on that I just want to be able to visually have in a separate area. And we can pin more than one item if we want to. It will highlight the one that we're on. So sorry that it forgets them. I know that is a big question. We have a question, is there a way to close a tab or all tabs without being asked if I want to save? I don't know of a way to do that. If anyone else does, I mean, other than cutting the power. Like, I can think of a way to do it, but it's probably not what you want. You could kill the application. You can kill the process. But if anyone knows of a way that isn't killing the process to do that, that would be a cool one to know, though I would probably hit it by accident, knowing me. So I would have to be careful there. But great question. Shortcuts. We had a question about shortcuts, and this can save a ton of time too, and it's one of those things you configure in Tools Options, but there are some built-in shortcuts that are really handy. So I'm going to go back up to my Tools menu, and I go into Options, and we are going to go down to Shortcuts. And this is one of the ones where the search doesn't always help that much. Like, I type the word shortcut, and it's like, oh, environment and keyboard. And it did find something like, shortcuts, but like this isn't what I'm talking about. So this is one of the reasons I say that this little find bar up here isn't always perfect. I'm going to click the X to clear the search. And then I'm going to go down to, let's see if we can actually, all right, let's go back to my notes. I'm like, now I've gotten myself lost. Oh, there we are. I need to scroll up a little. There are so many options that I give presentations on this and I get lost. What we actually want is environment, keyboard, and then this is what it wasn't showing us in the little find thing. There is actually a little child node here named query shortcuts, and that's the one we want that the search options just doesn't pick up on. So don't get too reliant on this search box because it's not quite perfect. But this is very, very useful, the query shortcuts. By default, I'm going to click reset to default. Not everything in here has reset to default. I think it's great though. By default, Alt F1 is SP help. And I really like this one. There's some other things in here that I don't find as useful. I don't like SP Who. I'm going to show you something I like better than SP Who. And SP Lock, I also don't use very often. There's newer ways to look. If you really need to know who's got what locks, there's better way. It's a little old-fashioned, both of those. They're a little outdated, but that's okay because we can put our own shortcuts in here for things that aren't outdated. But the first one I'm going to use is this default Alt F1 because the thing I like better than SP Who is a stored procedure called SP Who is active. It is a totally free stored procedure written by Atom Mechanic, and it shows you what is not just who is connected to my SQL server, but who's running something, how long have they been running, and you can even do things like what is the query execution plan. Way more flexible. But one of the things with SP Who's active is it has a lot of different options you can set, and it's hard to remember the parameters. So Alt F1 can come in handy. I'm going to highlight SP Who's active, and what I did is I hit Control Shift and then an arrow to highlight the whole word. And now if I hit Alt F1, it runs SP Who, the built, or sorry, not SP Who, it runs the built-in SP help against SP Who is active, which tells me things like, and I'm going to hit F6. F6 takes me down to the results pane and it defaults to the top one. But if I hit it again, I can keep iterating through them. So it tells me, okay, here's when this was created and it's a stored procedure. And I'm going to hit F6 again to go to the second results pane, right? So F6, when I have multiple results pane, will toggle through them, then go to messages, then go back up to my T-SQL. And this is really useful because maybe I don't want to, maybe I want to copy some stuff out of here. So, okay, I want to use the get plans parameter name. So I just copied that. I'm going to hit F6 again, and now I'm just going to paste it in and say I want get plans equals 1. I did have to remember that that's how you do get plans equals 1, but now I can run it with that parameter. And what I can see is nobody's doing anything on my SQL Server instance, whereas if I was going to run something like SP Who, it would show me a whole bunch of stuff that was just sitting idle doing background stuff. Well, maybe I want to run this all the time, and maybe I don't want to have to type it every time. Well, let's go back to our Tools menu, go back to Options, and in keyboard shortcuts, I'm going to go down, and I like to do this one as Control-0. I've put as my shortcut in Control-0 the whole thing that I want to run. Exec stored procedure name at get plans equals 1. I'm going to click OK, and now when I hit Control-0, it will run that with that parameter. There is one problem, and this is one of the confusing things. Again, if I do this from my session right now, it may not work depending on what happened when this session was opened. Keyboard shortcuts, you also have to open a new window to get them to apply, right? So now in a new session, when I run Control-0, it is doing that, and it does have the at get plans equals 1. If I scroll over here, somewhere in here, we should, there we go. There is a query plan, like nothing's showing right now because I don't have anything, but it does have a query plan column confirming that it did that. All right, cool. So check in, someone's asking if I reported the shortcut problems. Microsoft has a special community for Visual Studio 2017 problems. For this one, I should report this, but this is the SQL Server team who manages this, not the Visual Studio team. So I think that I should actually file an issue on connect.microsoft.com, just because the Visual Studio team, I believe, is still totally separate from the SQL Server team. Even though Management Studio is integrated with Visual Studio, I think they're actually separate teams. But someone correct me if I'm wrong about that. All right, cool. So let's get back to our other window, and I'm going to try not to use the arrow there. It is funny because sometimes when you're trying to use the mouse more and more, you find yourself, or trying to use the keyboard more and more, you find yourself reaching for that mouse without meaning it. So I did Control F4 and closed my window there. All right, so setting new shortcuts is lots and lots of fun. We'll use Control Tab to go over, and we are now at 9:51. And I think what we're going to do is switch on over to the stupid pet tricks real fast and then do some questions. So everything I show here in stupid pet tricks is interesting to know about, but this is in the category of silly things and trivia and things to look out for. I am not suggesting that you do these things. I have had them done to me. At least the first one was played as a prank on me, and I never forgot it. I left my workstation unlocked and walked away from it, and my fellow members of my DBA team had some fun with me. What they did is they went into Tools, Options, and they went to Query Execution. Somewhere deep in here is Query Execution, and there is something that I, at the time, didn't even know you could change in SQL Server. You can change the batch separator. It just defaults to the word go, but this is actually a client setting. So I'm going to change it to goo. Now, batches are no longer terminated with go, they're terminated with goo. This is part of what, as the receiver of this prank, made it extra confusing, is this only applies to new windows. So what the person playing the prank on me did is they changed the setting but then left everything open as it was. So my normal window that I came back to on it worked completely fine, and normally I didn't notice anything was wrong until I opened a script in a new window. And now suddenly I have a red underline under go, and I get an error if I run this because it no longer recognizes the word go. The word go is totally meaningless. Now, this is dangerous, and this is why I wouldn't play this prank to people, is if someone needs to run a script for work, they're going to start you could cause actual problems with this. But if someone does this to you and you start seeing underlines under the word go, someone has changed your batch separator, and you should always lock your keyboard, always lock your workstation, because some pranksters are not very responsible. So we're going to go back up into Tools, Options, and we're going to reset our batch separator and go back there. We'll use Control F4, and we don't want to save changes there. Even weirder, I did Control R there to hide my results. Even weirder, there is a very strange way that you can use extended properties in SQL Server to make things invisible. This is something I learned from Kenneth Fisher on his blog, and I saw his post on this, and I was like, that is so weird. I have to try that out. Extended properties are something that are worth knowing about in SQL Server, and extended properties are good for documentation. So you should use extended properties. You should only use them for good. You should not use them for evil. I personally think this is evil. So I want to get to Object Explorer. I'm going to do Alt F7 and open up Object Explorer. And I am actually going to go up and use the mouse to pin it, because I haven't figured out how to pin it with just the keyboard yet. If someone knows how to use that pin with just the keyboard, I would love that. I want to view the application.cities table here. So if I go under tables, here, right, everything's normal right now. I've got a table named application.cities. It's even got that cool new temporal versioning on it that they've got in 2016. Everything's normal. Well, What Kenneth blogged about is that there's a very special extended property that you have to set a very specific name, Microsoft Database Tools support, with a value of hide. You specify the schema name and the table name. So I'm going to add this extended property to my database. And after that's added, if I refresh in Object Explorer, application.cities is no longer in the list. It is, just like the extended property says, hidden. Now it's only hidden from Object Explorer. This table is still there. Like if I look at sys.objects and look for the object is still totally there. The user table is there. I can query it. We have not changed permissions on it whatsoever. All we have done is hidden it from Object Explorer, and it's not just hidden from us. I am a sysadmin on this instance. It is hidden from everyone in Object Explorer, all sysadmins. It just won't show up in Management Studio Object Explorer anymore. Which kind of, that's the part where I'm just like, just, you know, show it to me. People can find it in sys.objects. You know, it's, security by obscurity never really works. You can monitor for this. You can monitor sys.extended properties to see, are there any extended properties with this name? So if you're worried that someone's going to create this though, then I do think that's more of an HR problem than anything else. If it happens, you can drop the extended property. I'm going to drop the extended property and now refresh that over there, and now application.cities is back. So there are some wacky things. You can also create, you know, databases where the name is just a space. It doesn't let you do it in the GUI, but it does let you do it in T-SQL. There's all sorts of weird stuff you can do. Use the force wisely, because you can accidentally cause some problems with that though. But there are lots of little stupid pet tricks you can do in Management Studio. I'm going to start going through some of the questions in the minutes we have left. We have a question, can you set Management Studio into dark mode? Lots and lots of requests to have an official dark scheme for Management Studio. And, you know, folks want this to happen, and under Tools Options, there are some color themes in there. There is no officially supported dark scheme. There are some hacks out there to do it that require changing all sorts of stuff in sort of the innards of how Management Studio is adapted from Visual Studio. I personally don't like changing that stuff, so I don't do it, because then if something weird happens and Management Studio starts crashing, how do I know if it's what I did for, you know what I mean? So I'm not that fond of it. I think there may be a connect item out there that you can vote up. I would love a dark scheme as well. There's a question. Is there any shortcut for getting rid of unneeded brackets? So great question from Rick. And let's see if we can, let's get a bunch of, there's an easy way to get a bunch of brackets. Let's open up Object Explorer Details. One of the cool little features in Management Studio, let's say I want to script out all the indexes on application.people. Well, in Object Explorer itself, I can only highlight one of these guys. If I hit Shift, it doesn't let me highlight more than one. But if I open Object Explorer Details, I can highlight lots of them, right-click, and script them all as create to a new query editor window. They are all scripted out, though, with lots and lots of name qualifying brackets on them, right? And if I scripted out a table, all of the columns might have those on them as well, depending on how I did it. I don't have a great shortcut to get rid of those other than find and replace. So Control H brings up find and replace. I can put in a bracket and, you know, arrow over and do that. Control H again, do the other bracket, you know, tab on over and replace all. That's all I got there. There is a way, though, that you can auto type all of the column names in a table without brackets, however. If I want to, here, now I have lots of new windows open, so let's close that one. And I'm going to do Alt F7 to get to Object Explorer this time. Let's say I want to get all the columns from application.people. This does require using the mouse, but what I can do is I can drag the whole columns folder over. Oh, they changed. They did They did change, they just changed this. So in 17.1, SSMS 17.1, when you dragged that over, they didn't have brackets around them. And there was a bug filed on this, which I think is fair because it's actually inconsistent, because if you drag the table name over, it has brackets qualifying it, and it has for a long time. Dragging the column folder over, these wouldn't have brackets on them, and a bug was filed to make it consistent, so even that has the brackets now. This just changed in 17.2, but let's say I want all those columns, I can just, now I have all the columns named there. I could use Control H and find and replace the brackets. There probably is a way where you could use a regular expression to do it in one find replace. To do either of those brackets, I'd have to test out different characters between them to get the right regular expression though. But I bet there is a way you could do it in one pass of find replace with a regular expression. Let's see if I can find stuff. Oh, good tip from Claudio. Hi, Claudio. Nice to see you here. That F8 will open Object Explorer instead of using the Alt F7, and then that F7 without the Alt will open Object Explorer details. Yeah, and on the up here on the menu, if you forget those, I think that it does actually, yeah, under the View menu, if you're trying to learn shortcuts, the View menu helps. For some reason, I've never been that good with these. I am doing better with the Alt F7. But if you use like registered servers a lot, you might like Control Alt G. So there's a few things in here that might be handy on the View menu. Thank you so much, Claudio. Question, can I upgrade SSMS to the new version and keep all my settings such as registered servers and saved passwords cached in SSMS? So great question. When you install SSMS, you have a choice as to whether you want to upgrade or install side by side. If you install side by side, you're going to have to configure things in the new one. If you upgrade, it should keep your settings, but I would be prepared to have to reset it in case that upgrade messes up, right? So I'm always kind of the way of like, okay, you may forget all my stuff. For registered servers, one thing you can do is you could do a central management server, which effectively, central management server is similar to registered servers, but it saves the configuration elsewhere. Now you've got to be really careful because you don't want to save passwords that other people can necessarily use. You want to, use with care, but that might be one thing you can do. I'm going by memory here. Robert Davis, I believe, has written some posts on where information from registered servers are stored in the Windows registry, so that for purposes of backing it up, I believe. So if you wanted to back up some of those settings, I'm not a huge fan of editing or restoring parts of the registry without specific advice to do so, because I have totally hosed things on my computer by messing with the registry before. But you could search for like Robert Davis registered servers. He also goes by SQL Soldier. You might be able to find something there. Michael Swart says you can pin Object Explorer with the keyboard Alt-WK dock window. Okay, let's do this. Okay, so we're gonna get Object Explorer. I'm gonna go there with, I'm gonna try to remember what Claudio told me. F8. F8 isn't switching me over, so I'm going to go Alt. Sometimes you just got to do what you know. So I'm going to do Alt F7. Okay. And then Alt plus W plus K. Dock window. Alt W K. Did it do it? I'm like, okay, now I'm going to, it did. It totally did. Okay, so Alt, we're getting up to the window, and then, okay, so on here, there, okay, doc is tabbed document. I actually don't see the K. So that's actually kind of magical that, oh, there it is. I see. It isn't easy to see for me because it is docked, but I didn't ever realized that's what that was. Thank you so much, Michael. This is absolutely the most fun thing about webcasting is you get tips from people in there too. Michael also has a regex for square brackets. He says it's awkward. Michael, if you blog that, I bet people will love that. So it is so awkward that I actually don't know, because you have to use escapes to backslash it out. So there is like what looks like an emoji too. So we've gone over, Steve. I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay.
I was way too busy learning stuff. But we should probably wrap up and let people go back to their work lives, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, we have to eventually.
Yeah. All right.
Well, we really appreciate it. As always, you give a great presentation, and the handouts, I'm going to post those if that's okay also.
Yes, please
that
do.
way, in case somebody didn't get this before the session comes down. And definitely go to SQL Workbooks and check out a lot of her new stuff. We've got one more session that one more comp we're going to give away, and the way we're going to do it is everybody that attends a session either in Down Under or here between now and October the 3rd, I know that's cutting it close, we're going to be put into a drawing for the one last session that we have to give away. So thank you, Kendra. We loved it. Go to SQL Workbooks and try out a lot of her free education. I mean, it's fantastic. Anyway, thank you. See you next week, actually.
Bye,
Well,
folks.
bye.